So the first thing that you need to know about starships is that they were meant to fly. Hands up and touch the sky. No, wait. That's the...
Nicki Minaj.
Never mind. Anyway, hey folks, Alexander Winn here, and I'm going to take a break from talking about TerraGenesis for a week and talk to you about something that I always love learning more about and talking about with people, and that is interstellar travel. The idea of how we might travel not just between planets, but from our solar system to an entirely new one. We've gotten some feedback from some of our players that as much as they love the videos talking about TerraGenesis and how it was made and the various things that went into it, they're interested in hearing more about the science behind some of the things we talk about. Not just the gameplay mechanics, but also the general science of space exploration overall. So that's what we're going to do this week, is talk about the idea of interstellar travel and how we might explore the universe beyond our solar system. So this is something that I've been wanting to talk about for a little while now because it's just one of the most fun things ever to discuss, and there's so many different possibilities and different sort of approaches to the problem. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you get all of our new episodes as soon as they come out. So the first thing to address when talking about interstellar travel is to clear up one quick mistake that a lot of people make, which is exactly what it means. So in a lot of science fiction, they sort of go straight from people live only on Earth to people are traveling the galaxy, and there's kind of nothing in between. In the real world, obviously, before we start traveling to other stars, we need to start landing on a few other planets. We need to get some outposts on Mars and that sort of thing. And a lot of science fiction franchises have sort of quick and easy solutions to that. You know, in the Star Trek universe, Zefram Cochrane invented warp drive before kind of anything happened in the solar system, it seems like. And all of a sudden, they were players on the galactic stage. Star Wars, to the best of my knowledge, doesn't even go into how the galactic civilization began. It just always was. And a lot of these sort of franchises just jump straight onto the galaxy. They jump straight from Earth to the galaxy. So the term interstellar travel often gets used interchangeably with the idea of space travel itself. That if you are traveling between planets, you are going on an interstellar journey. And that's actually not true. There is another word, intrastellar, which is traveling within a solar system. And that would be traveling from Earth to Mars, or traveling from Earth to Jupiter, Neptune, that sort of thing. That's going to be what humanity does for a long time, is just traveling within our solar system. And it's going to be a big deal when humanity first starts talking about actual interstellar journeys, to go from our solar system to another solar system. That's going to be a big jump, and it has a whole host of challenges and hurdles to overcome that are completely unprecedented even within intrastellar travel. Which begs the question, why do it at all? You know, a lot of people talk about this with space exploration in general. It's like, why would we go to Mars when we could just use the money to solve our problems here on Earth and that sort of thing? Which is a question that drives me nuts, and I think drives a lot of people nuts, because it's very short-sighted in terms of the return on investment, basically. That the money that you spend going into space is eventually going to pay off in benefits back on Earth. But when you start talking about interstellar travel, it does start to get harder to make that argument. You know, when you're talking about sending a ship or a fleet of ships out into the void, and they're not even going to arrive at their destination for 1,000 years, why would you pay for that? What is the benefit of that? What are the reasons that one might do interstellar travel? The first reason that you would undertake interstellar travel is just plain science, just the love of discovery. Either for its own sake, because you live in a society like the Federation from Star Trek and you just want to explore, or because there might be some tangible benefit. For example, learning how solar systems evolve so that you can better predict our own survival within our solar system, or making contact with an alien race, or any number of things that are about learning. That would be the first reason to undertake an interstellar voyage. The next is just a frontier spirit. So if the first reason was you want to learn something, the second reason is because you want to go. You want to not be in this solar system anymore. You want to be in another solar system. And this could, again, be just sort of a quixotic desire to go out into the universe, or it could be a very practical desire that, like, there's something wrong with your solar system, and so you need to leave. You need to go somewhere else. Maybe you're being persecuted by a civilization here, and you need to go find your promised land. Or maybe there's been a disaster, and it's, you know, rats leaving a sinking ship, and you can't stay in the solar system anymore. That frontier spirit sort of blends seamlessly into the main reason that people talk about exploring beyond our solar system, which is survival. And that is, as much as we love our solar system, as much as we love Earth, at the end of the day, it's not going to be around forever. It'll be here for millions and billions of years, but that's not forever. And at a certain point, you kind of have to ask if you want to keep all your eggs in one basket. You know, Earth is a great planet, the solar system is a great solar system, but stuff happens in the universe. You know, asteroids hit planets, gamma ray bursts fry entire solar systems. There are a lot of things that can go wrong. And so when you're talking about the long-term survival of humanity or of a particular civilization, oftentimes people suggest that at a certain point we need to start talking about journeying to other solar systems for no other reason than because I don't trust this rock. Too many things can go wrong. There are too many crazy people with nuclear weapons. There are too many rocks flying around in the sky. There are too many things that could happen. And if they happen, it's game over. All of humanity is gone because we're all in one place. So, traveling interstellar voyages is one way to just diffuse humanity. Everybody go off to different solar systems, and now not all of our eggs are in one basket. And you can sort of take a few more hits because people are spread out. I also want to take a second here and address one reason why you wouldn't go on an interstellar voyage, because it's something that a lot of people sort of just assume it's kind of the default answer, which is resources. When people talk about exploring space, oftentimes they're talking about mining asteroids, or they're talking about landing on another planet and mining for gold, or mining for various things, or even creating new resources. You can go to a planet like Mars and either terraform it or grow things in habs and greenhouses and go and sell that back on Earth. There are any number of resources that you can find in space, and they are of incredible value. But even Mars and the asteroid belt are really, really, really close compared to other solar systems. The kind of scales that we're talking about here, using modern propulsion, getting to Mars would take a few months. Getting to Jupiter or Saturn would take a few years. Getting to the next closest solar system would take something like 50,000 years. It's just so radically huge. It's so far beyond anything that we could do practically that the idea of going to another solar system for resources kind of breaks down. There are a lot of reasons to travel to other solar systems, but the idea that you're going to go mine and then bring things back is not really practical unless you start talking about some of the faster-than-light systems, which we're going to be discussing later in the video. So let's talk about how would you travel between solar systems. You've committed to the idea for whatever reason. Maybe it's science, maybe it's survival, maybe you just want to go explore. How are you going to do it? Well, a lot of that depends on what exactly you want to do. Because the first option really only works for science, and that is unmanned probes. The short version is you could not travel across interstellar space. You could send a ship, which is much smaller and much lighter and doesn't have to worry about things like life support and food, and just fire it off into the void as fast as it can go, and then just wait. And it'll get there eventually, and you can go about your day. Go about your life, go about your children's and grandchildren's and great-grandchildren's lives, and on and on and on and on and on, until the probe finally arrives 50,000 years later and starts gathering data. If all you were interested in is data, you're good to go. Obviously, this is not the most romantic way to explore the universe, nor is it the most interesting or practical way to explore the universe, because not everybody has 50,000 years to wait just to get to the very nearest solar system. So, if we're ruling out that idea, then we need to start talking about having a crew. We're talking about a ship that is going to go from our solar system to another solar system with people on it. And that's where things start getting interesting, because if you're going to carry people, then you have to deal with the incredible distances that they're going to be traversing, filled with nothing. There is nothing for millions and millions and millions of miles. Barely any dust, the occasional hydrogen atom. Once every couple of millennia, you might pass a pebble. Anything you need, you're going to need to bring with you. Anything that you're going to need when you get there, you're either going to need to be able to make or have brought with you. It's an incredible undertaking. And so a lot of the systems that people have developed for traveling between stars are pretty complicated or pretty weird. So there are three basic categories of interstellar travel systems. And you can basically describe them as slow, fast, and really fast. So we're going to start out with the slow, which is generally something that humanity could do right now. It would obviously be very expensive to make a ship like this, and it would be an undertaking that would take thousands of years, or more, millions of years, depending on where your destination is. But it's something that is not really so much science fiction in the sense of something that we couldn't do, and more like something that we just don't want to do, because why? So one of the most famous versions of a slow mission across the stars is a generation ship. This is something that has been portrayed in a lot of different science fiction stories, and it has a certain romance to it in kind of a grim way. The idea is basically you're going to put a bunch of people on a ship and you're going to send it and they're going to start flying and they'll get there in 1,000 years. The end. Deal with it. You live on a ship now, and so do your kids and your grandkids and your great-grandkids and on and on and on. And you're just going to live. This is just going to be your city. And it's going to fly through space, and centuries are going to pass, generations growing old and dying and having kids, and on and on and on, until the ship arrives. It's that simple. It's not simple at all. There's an incredible amount of work that would have to go into making a generation ship. Not only the design of the thing that can actually last that long, which humanity hasn't really built anything that can last functionally for 50,000 years, but you also need to have systems for life support and food. You need to have backup systems and redundancies and all sorts of stuff that would go into keeping a population of humans alive for thousands of years. You would also have to deal with societal stress. Humans are really, really different right now than they were 50,000 years ago. And who knows how many generations after launch it would be before people start rising up in revolution against the captain of the ship, or deciding that they want to turn the ship around and go back home, or any number of other things. By the time the ship arrives at its destination, it might be a completely different society from the one that left. In fact, it almost certainly would be. There's also an interesting ethical conversation that happens around generation ships, which is that you're basically imprisoning people. You know, once that ship leaves, at a certain point, it's so far away from the solar system that they functionally can't turn around, which means that your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren are stuck there. There is nothing they can do. You have effectively sentenced generation after generation of people to be imprisoned in this ship. Which is one of the reasons why, if you see a lot of stories like The Expanse, generation ships are often put a premium on comfort. They're often ships that have incredible open spaces, or they have open vistas, or they have simulations, or any number of things that can kind of keep people a little more comfortable, keep them from going stir crazy on this ship, because they're going to be there for a while. So if a generation ship doesn't sound like your thing, because maybe you want to see the alien planet at the end of this incredibly long road, your next option is suspended animation. And this is one of those things that has been kicked around in science fiction circles since like the 1920s, which is basically you freeze dry people, and then you thaw them out when you get there. And so from your perspective, you just go to sleep, and then you wake up and hey, you're there. Took no time at all. Except you didn't witness the 50,000 years of history unfolding while you were asleep. So by the time you arrive at your new planet, Earth is totally different. The universe around you is totally different. But you aren't. You and the crew and everybody else arrives, the automated system detects that you've arrived, it starts waking people up, and you all get back to work, and from your perspective, hey, it was like a weekend. This has the advantage of convenience for the crew. The main downside of this, of course, is what if something goes wrong? What if 30,000 years into your 50,000 year voyage, you hit a space rock, or the ship starts deteriorating, or any number of things that would require humans on hand to respond to it. And of course, you could have safety protocols where, like, maybe somebody wakes up, maybe it wakes up the emergency crew and they deal with it, and then you put them back to sleep, or you don't. But it's a risky proposition to fire a ship off carrying thousands of people who are all asleep. Flying on autopilot is a risky proposition, especially when you're going out into the universe and you don't know what's out there. You don't know what all the risks are of interstellar travel because by definition, nobody's done it yet. There's also a variant idea of the suspended animation concept, which is rather than sending frozen people, we send frozen embryos. So again, this would allow the ship to be much smaller because you don't have actual full-sized adults in pods. But the idea would be that this is sort of like a birth ship, that you fire off the ship and it's carrying human embryos, and when the ship arrives, instead of waking up the crew and they get to work, it starts creating people. It starts giving birth to children. And then the ship has the ability to raise those children by itself. So it can educate them, it can bring them up, it can teach them about the people who sent this ship, and then they become the founding members of this new society. Personally, I think this one sounds like a terrible idea, maybe because I played Horizon Zero Dawn and I know how this kind of thing goes.
Ooh, that's a lot of berries.
There is one other type of slow interstellar mission which is worth mentioning, and it's one that I've only started hearing about recently, and to be honest, I can't decide if it sounds like the best of both worlds or the worst of both worlds. And that is an idea that some people call island hopping. So the idea is it's kind of like a generation ship where you have a crew and you go off into the unknown. But instead of just making a beeline for where you want to go, Alpha Centauri, you actually chart planetoids and asteroids and passing debris through the universe, and you make stops along the way. So you, instead of spending 50,000 years traveling, you spend like 2,000 years traveling to a rock, and then you stop and you mine for resources and you make any repairs that are necessary and all that sort of thing, and then you sort of aim for the next rock. And so instead of just going from point A to point B, you go from point A to here, 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 and then you arrive. Which is nice in the sense that you can refuel along the way, but it's not exactly like more efficient. So yeah, I don't know. Could make a cool sci-fi story, but if I were doing it, that sounds like it would be an even more grueling task. So those are the different ways that you could take the slow route to another solar system. But of course, that's no fun. Let's talk about going fast. The idea behind a fast propulsion system is generally described in terms of constant acceleration. So if we don't have something that can just kick us up straight to 90% the speed of light, which would just crush all the humans inside the ship, you've got to slowly accelerate up. But the interesting thing that happens with constant acceleration is you can go really fast just by very slowly increasing your speed. You can just imagine driving a car, slowly pressing down on the pedals so the speed starts going more and more and more and more and more. Imagine if you just kept doing that. So your speed just kept going more and more and more, and now you're passing 80 miles an hour, now you're passing 100 miles an hour, now you're passing 150, 200, 500, 1,000, and it just keeps accelerating. And so the idea is that you wouldn't actually go that fast from Earth to Mars. But then from Mars to Jupiter, you'd be going even faster. From Jupiter to Saturn, you'd be going even faster. And then after a while, you are passing solar systems really fast. You can fly through the entire galaxy really fast. All you need is a long enough runway to get up to speed. Constant acceleration also has a few other interesting things that come along with it. These are often familiar to fans of The Expanse, because the universe of The Expanse, which is a book series and TV show, plays a lot with the idea of constant acceleration. For example, they use thrust gravity. The idea is, whereas a lot of sci-fi stories have artificial gravity that they just kind of like hand wave, we've got gravity because we invented a machine. The Expanse, they get their gravity on their ships from thrust. In the same way that when you accelerate in a car, it pushes you back into your chair. Accelerating creates a force from inertia that pushes against the direction of acceleration. And so in The Expanse, all of the spaceships are built on what's called a skyscraper model, so that your feet are pointed down toward the engine. Your head is pointed toward where you want to go. And as the ship accelerates, it pushes you down into the deck and creates gravity. Of course, it's not really gravity, it's just inertia. But because the ship is constantly accelerating, you are constantly being pushed down, and it creates a sense of gravity. And the other nice thing about that is, as fast as you want to go creates more gravity. So you can actually modulate how much gravity you want to have on your ship based on basically how hard are you pushing down on the pedal. There's also a maneuver from The Expanse that a lot of people talk about, which is called the flip and burn. So the idea with constant acceleration that you always have to keep in mind is, in space, you don't slow down. You know, in an atmosphere, if you throw a ball, it's going really fast when it leaves your hand, but it rapidly starts to slow down, and eventually it'll just fall and hit the ground and stop. But in space, if you throw a baseball, it's gonna keep going at the same rate that you threw it until the end of the universe because of inertia. There's no air to slow it down, so it's just gonna keep going, which means if you have a spaceship that's going really, 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 really fast, and you point it at a planet, you're gonna hit the planet. You can stop the engine and you're just gonna keep going. So to combat this, what they do is you start accelerating a ship, fire coming out the back of my hand here, and you go faster and faster and faster, and then when you reach the halfway point, you actually flip the ship around so that the engine is pointed toward your destination. You start burning again, and you slow down until you come to a stop. And so the whole journey, you have this speed curve where you're going faster and faster and faster to the midway point, and then slower and slower and slower until you arrive. That's called the flip and burn. And that's also something that if you're trying to reach these speeds that could get you to another solar system, you're probably going to have something along those lines. You leave Earth, you're going to start accelerating faster and faster and faster. Halfway to your destination, you flip back around, you start decelerating so that when you arrive, you come to a stop without impact. Constant acceleration is a really good system for intrastellar travel. But when you start talking about interstellar travel, going to other solar systems, there is one other factor that you have to start taking into account, which gets really interesting and really confusing, which is time dilation. So as a lot of sci-fi nerds will tell you, the faster you go, the slower time moves. And this isn't science fiction, this is actually science fact. The faster you go, the slower time seems to go for you. There's an old parable about two twins. One of them got in a rocket ship and flew away at the speed of light and came back. And when he lands, he's still the same age, but his brother has aged and now has grandkids. Because the astronaut was going so fast that time slowed down for him. Which means that when you're talking about traveling to another solar system, there actually start to be two different time periods that you have to talk about. You have to talk about how long does it take for the crew, and how long does it take for the people back on Earth. If you had a constant acceleration of about 1g, which is to say somebody standing on this spaceship experiences about Earth normal gravity, because the spaceship is accelerating faster and faster and faster. Going at that rate of acceleration would actually get you to the nearest solar system in about 40 years. It's not that bad. I mean, that's most of a lifetime by modern standards, but it does mean that you yourself would get to see the alien world. And the math gets even more impressive from there, because the thing is, the farther away the thing is that you're moving toward, the more room you have to accelerate. So there's actually this increasing sense of return on your speed. You can travel to the next solar system in 40 years, but you can actually travel across the galaxy in 50 years. you can travel to the next galaxy, the Andromeda Galaxy, in like 60 or 70 years, because you're going faster and faster and faster, and time is dilating more and more and more. From the perspective of somebody back on Earth, you did spend thousands of years in transit. But from your perspective, you only spent a couple of decades. The whole idea of time dilation is kind of a mind bender, and it gets into really complicated math if you start wanting to talk about exactly what kind of effect would it have. But it does mean that all of these different fast acceleration systems do start to get more interesting, because if you get up to even 10% the speed of light, you start to experience time differently. And you start to have to factor that in when talking about how long things are going to take. Now, there are some downsides to going really, really fast. The first one is probably obvious. You need to carry a lot of fuel. Whatever kind of system you use, if it's based on fuel, you've got to carry all of it. All the fuel you need to get where you're going, and if you're planning on coming back, you probably need to carry all the fuel that you're going to need to get back to. And that can make for an incredibly huge spaceship. When you look at images of the space shuttle taking off, you've got the space shuttle, you've got that giant orange rocket and the two white rockets next to it. Almost all of that is fuel. Massive thing, dwarfs the actual craft that you're trying to send into space. Any rocket that a space agency sends up into space, you can look at a teardown of it or a cross-section on the internet, and the overwhelming majority of the volume of that craft is going to be fuel. And that's just to get into orbit. If you're trying to burn hard, constant acceleration all the way to another solar system, you're going to have to bring a massive amount of fuel. Another problem with going really, really fast is that it really reduces your ability to change your plans. If you are going to another solar system and halfway through you decide that you don't want to go there and you have to come back to Earth, tough. You've already built up so much momentum. Your ship is going so fast through the galaxy that you could turn around and start burning. In fact, you're probably already turning around and burning because you have to slow down to get where you're going. But you are going to have to bleed off all that speed and come to a stop at your destination before you can even think about turning around and starting to accelerate back home. If you wanted to make a right angle turn, you basically just can't, because you're going so hard in this direction that in order to go this direction, you would have to, again, remove all of your momentum that way and then start going that way. It becomes this system where the more you accelerate, the faster you're going, the more committed you are to the journey you're on. Which means that if you're planning on going on an interstellar journey using a system of constant acceleration, you are not only going to have to bring everything you need, you're going to have thought of everything you might need, because there's no going back. The other downside of traveling at incredibly high speeds is the risk of impact. You know, we say space is empty, but it's not entirely empty. Space is really, really, really huge, and the amount of space between two solar systems can hold any number of small pebbles, large rocks, even traveling planetoids, to say nothing of just gas particles and dust particles. There's a lot of stuff out in that nothingness. And if you're going half the speed of light, even a grain of dust could have massive impact damage. The amount of damage that is done when two bodies hit each other is impacted by a lot of different things. But one of the most important is how much energy is there in the impact. And for a shorthand for that, you can basically ask yourself, what is the speed differential between these two objects? Anybody can tell you that if you're driving a car at 10 miles an hour and you hit a wall, you're going to be okay. If you're driving a car and you're going 100 miles an hour and you hit a wall, you're probably going to die. And the only difference is how fast you are going. Now imagine if you're going 100 miles per second, or 1,000 miles per second, and you hit something that isn't. That's going to be an incredibly powerful impact that could absolutely vaporize your ship. And here's the important part. It doesn't have to be that big an object. Even very small rocks in space, if they're going fast enough, can cause massive disasters for traveling ships. So before embarking upon your interstellar voyage, you're definitely going to need to outfit your ship with very sensitive systems for detecting incoming objects. And like we talked about, you can't exactly turn this thing. You're going so fast that you don't have the ability to just stop or outmaneuver something. So you're also going to have a system for deflecting objects as you come across them. All right, that's all very well and good, but how would we do it? The first way is a conventional rocket. You take some rocket fuel, you burn it, it comes out the back of your ship, which pushes your ship forward, wahoo. You could theoretically do this. I mean, technically you could throw a baseball and it would get to another solar system. It would just take like 1,000,000 years. But the problem with conventional rockets is that they're just not that efficient in terms of the mass of the fuel compared to the acceleration for your ship. At the end of the day, you just don't get that much bang for your buck. So you would need to bring an incredibly huge amount of fuel to get you up to the speeds to make interstellar travel viable. Which is why scientists have started proposing other systems. Not just conventional rockets that burn fossil fuels, but, for example, ion engines. Ion engines sound like something from a video game, but they actually exist. There are spacecraft out there that use ion engines right now. And the idea behind an ion engine is that you super energize particles, basically, and then you emit them out at really high velocities. And that can push your ship forward much more efficiently because you're not getting rid of nearly as much mass to get the same amount of thrust. There are also nuclear fission and nuclear fusion engines, which work again on roughly the same principle. You energize mass, you burn mass in a particular way with the goal of ejecting that mass with a high enough energy level that it pushes your ship forward more efficiently. If you're the kind of engineering nerd who wants to know more about how fusion engines or fission engines or ion engines work, there are any number of articles that you can find online that go into it. It's a little bit beyond my ability to communicate to you in this video, but there's some really interesting work out there, and I really encourage you to check it out. That being said, there are a few other ways of accelerating up to a significant portion of the speed of light that don't have to do with rockets, that don't have to do with shooting something out the back so you go forward. These systems you could summarize as being sails and beams. The idea is there is actually movement in space, both particles and energy. And scientists have demonstrated that you can actually create a giant sail, just like a sail of a ship on an ocean on Earth, and capture some of that to propel you forward. And it's not a lot, unless you have a truly enormous sail, but it is enough to move you forward. And given enough time and enough energy, you can pick up really impressive speeds. The beams come in as a way of propelling your own ship, sort of like harnessing your own wind to push your sailing ship forward. So the idea with these is that you can actually place a laser on Earth, for example, and fire it off into space at the ship that took off and capture it in the ship's sail and use that to push the ship forward. And the biggest problem here, of course, is aim. As that ship gets further and further away, it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, and you have to have more and more specific targeting. And of course, Earth is moving. Earth is rotating. Earth is orbiting the sun. The sun itself is moving. Everything in space is moving. So having to sort of track that ship off in the distance and fire that beam could be really tricky. That being said, it does have one massive advantage, which is that there is no fuel. You will never run out of fuel, and you don't have to worry about carrying fuel. You're just sailing along. Just like a sailing ship. You're just there, and it pulls you forward. And you can just keep going forever. It does make slowing down a little harder, because you can't do a flip and burn, because you're not burning anything. And scientists have proposed different methods of doing it. For example, one of them pictured two different sails, one on the front and one on the back. And when you want to flip around, you actually flip so that the larger sail is now facing backwards and it detaches. So you're firing beams to the larger sail and it bounces back and hits the other so that it pushes you back and decelerates you. It's a whole big complicated thing. But sails and beam-based propulsion are also one thing that people talk about when they're talking about practical methods for traveling to other solar systems. Now that's all very well and good, but I know why you're here and I know why I'm here, and that is to talk about faster than light travel. This is the fun part. Science fiction has given us a huge array of ideas for different ways that you could travel faster than the speed of light. But first off, why is that so hard? Well, the idea is that the speed of light is the ultimate constant in the universe. You cannot travel faster than the speed of light based on conventional physics. The reasons for that are numerous and very complex. But basically, think of it like this. The faster you go, the harder it is to go faster than that. And that gets harder and harder and harder and harder the faster you go. And at a certain point, you reach a level where you simply cannot accelerate anymore. You sort of top out. And that is the speed of light. Things get weird at the speed of light.
Oh my god, I still haven't found my berry.
There are any number of strange effects that happen and things that we take for granted, like the flow of time, that start to get really weird the closer you get to the speed of light. Any number of behaviors that are very strange, but as far as scientists believe, there doesn't seem to be any way to exceed it. You can get closer and closer and closer and closer and closer, but you can't go faster. And that's kind of a problem, because the speed of light is really, really fast, except when compared to the size of the universe. Even at the speed of light, traveling across the galaxy would take more than 25,000 years. And sure, getting to the next solar system, like we've been talking about this whole time, wouldn't be too hard. It would only take 4 years, even at the speed of light. And if you want to travel to another solar system, forget about it. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of years, even at the speed of light. So unless you're willing to commit to the idea of a generation ship, or something like that, something where you're going to spend thousands of years in transit, you have to have some way of traveling faster than the speed of light. But you can't. Physics tells us that you can't.
That can't stop me because I can't read.
Right? There are a couple of ways that scientists have suggested it might be possible to travel faster than the speed of light. Now, the big disclaimer here is this is all very theoretical. Everything that we've talked about up until now has been, yeah, you could do that. Varying degrees of it would be really expensive and really impractical, but yeah, sure, it's possible. If you want to freeze 1,000 people and stick them in a chili bin and send them across the universe for 40,000 years, why not? If you want to have a bunch of people live on a rotating drum and have their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren finally get where they started off going, okay. It's not violating the rules of physics in any way. But when we start talking about traveling faster than the speed of light, these are all very theoretical. These are things that some scientists have done the math and it seems to check out, but who knows really? Or, yeah, that's possible if you could harness as much energy as the Milky Way galaxy is going to output over the course of its entire life, then yeah, you could do that. So we're definitely entering the world of things that might be possible, but they're still fun to talk about. The most famous of these are wormholes. Wormholes are a concept that has been batted around by different scientists and that seems to fit with some ideas of how the universe works, but are not entirely proven. The idea is that there are 2 points in space that get momentarily connected through what's called an Einstein-Rosen bridge. And while according to normal space, these 2 points might be incredibly distant, like 2 different galaxies or 2 different solar systems, for this moment, there's a connection between them that you could theoretically travel along and effectively teleport. You would not actually be teleporting, but in terms of real space, normal space, you would be in one place and then you would be in the next place and you would not have traveled the distance between them. I heard a scientist one time describe this as the shortest distance between 2 points are the 2 points themselves. Wormholes are one of those things that the math kind of checks out, but it kind of seems too good to be true. The idea that you can just hop into a wormhole and appear somewhere else is very nice for science fiction because it allows you to cut to the chase and get to the story. But from a science perspective, you always have to be skeptical of things that seem like they're exactly what you wanted with no drawbacks. And so we'll see if wormholes ever actually become viable. The more famous version of how we might travel faster than light is something called the Alcubierre Drive. And I have no idea how to pronounce that. The Alcubierre Drive is inspired by warp drive from Star Trek. The scientist actually said as much. So in order to talk about this, I'm going to need to give you a brief rundown on how warp drive works. The idea behind warp drive, and thus the Alcubierre Drive, is an interesting little wrinkle in how travel works. One of the ways that I've explained it before is it's a little bit like a surfboard. If you saw someone surfing on a beach, you might easily look at them and say, wow, they're really moving fast. That surfboard is really going fast. But it would also not be wrong to look at that surfboard and say, you know, that surfboard isn't moving at all. The wave is moving fast. The surfboard is just a piece of wood. It just harnesses the movement that the wave already had. So the idea here is that traveling through space incurs a bunch of obligations. You can't travel faster than the speed of light. Inertia means you can't accelerate too fast or you're going to crush your crew back against the back wall of your ship. There are all of these different things that you have to factor in when traveling through space. But what if the space itself was moving? When you watch Star Trek, you'll hear terms like a warp bubble or a warp field. The idea is that the ship is actually not moving at all relative to the space around it. But what they're doing is they're taking that space that the ship is occupying and moving the space itself. They're warping the space so that the distance between us and our destination shrinks and the distance between us and our origin increases. And you can literally think of it like surfing on a wave. The wave itself is moving and the ship is staying still relative to the wave. So you wouldn't even be pressed back into your seat. As far as your body's concerned, you're standing still. But the space itself is moving relative to your destination. And because the space is moving, there's no reason it can't move faster than the speed of light. There's no reason that you have to worry about inertia or any of these things that affect traveling through space. It's a little loophole in physics. This was all invented for the TV show Star Trek, by the way. This is pure science fiction, until a Mexican physicist came along and actually indicated that, you know, given the right output of energy and the right oscillation and any number of these different factors, you might be able to pull that off. It does involve a few theoretical physics concepts that we're not sure if that's real or not. Things like negative mass. Right now, things can have mass or they can have no mass, but they can't have negative mass. But that is something that has been postulated by certain theories, and if it turns out to be true, then it does open the door for a lot of these new ideas like the Alcubierre Drive, or any number of other theoretical concepts. At its core, that is the best current theory for how you might travel faster than light and make interstellar travel actually practical. In order to cover the kind of distances that we're talking about between stars or even between galaxies, really the only way to make it practical would be to have faster than light travel. And while there's any number of ways that science fiction has postulated that that could happen, the idea of a warp drive, or the Alcubierre Drive, is probably the best bet for how it might actually work. So that pretty much sums up the state of interstellar travel. If you have other ideas that I didn't touch on, be sure to post them in the comments and I may address them in a later video. I really appreciate everybody watching this. This is a topic that I love to learn about and love to talk about, and it's great to talk with the fans and sort of dig into the topic. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for more videos coming up. We've also got a new show called The Synthesis, which we're going to be broadcasting live on Twitch starting this week and going weekly after that. We'll be mirroring it here on YouTube as well. I've been releasing videos for a little while now, and they've mostly been centered around the game TerraGenesis and how to play it and some of the stories that went into making it. But the fans have indicated that they're interested in more videos like this, that dig into the actual science independent of any particular video game. If you liked it, be sure to comment below and let us know. If you have things that you want us to talk more about, be sure to let us know. We're very open to feedback, and I absolutely love talking to the fans. So be sure to chime in on Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Discord, here in the YouTube comments, anywhere at all, and we'll see what you've got to say and see if we can incorporate it into our future plans. In the meantime, check out our other videos, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.